You are now listening to Carlie's Couch.
I'm Carlie.
And I'm Lex.
In this podcast, we discuss a wide array of topics about life and how to live your best life.
Whatever that looks like for you.
Hope y'all enjoy.
Everybody's got a story, but are you telling yours in a way that connects? This week on Carlie's Couch, we'll talk about how to be a better storyteller and why.
Good thing we're here with the boss lady over here. I got an expert on the couch today.
Okay, expert opinions.
Expert
over
Flextopia
here.
over here. Y'all ain't know she just dropped a song.
Bro, we had so much fun. Shout out Daria DiLolo,
Happy
episode
birthday.
10. Dang, that was a long time ago, huh?
That was a long time ago.
Dang. Seemed like we was already podcasting for years before she came on. No, Daria had the most fun birthday party ever and rented a studio and had a guy make a beat and had us in the studio rapping. But it was funny because, like, we literally was in there for, like, a couple hours and, like, people just went in the booth back to back to back and it was just, like, kind of fire. And it was fun being there. I understand now how I can see how rappers just be hyped listening to their own stuff because we just kept playing over and over and over. And then as everybody kept adding a verse, we listened to it over and over and over. And we was in there and knew everybody else's verses and turned up. And it was really fun. And yeah, what we got out of that couple hours in the booth was like, guys, we should do this again next week. So it was a lot of fun. Shout out DiLolo.
Yeah, happy birthday. Big Leo goddess. Yeah, my best friend and her fiance, they have a studio in New York and they be in the studio all the time and that makes sense.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Speaking of telling stories.
Yeah, which rap and music is, I guess, huh?
Absolutely.
So that's what we're talking about today, storytelling. We're going to talk about how stories stick with people a lot more easily than just speaking in other ways, how it builds trust, relatability, influence. So that's where some of the marketing kind of comes in. That's where, like, maybe building relationships with people strategically or just for connection's sake come into play. And then lastly, we're going to talk about some ways that you can improve your storytelling skills. So lock in, stay tuned, and let's get to it.
Yeah, because I feel like every time I'm on social media, I think it's mostly TikTok, not Instagram, but they're like, you got to tell stories and you got to connect with people and all this. And so that's kind of, I guess, what inspired the episode. But I think when I think about storytelling, like, I think that's how history got passed down for so many years. And especially like a lot of Black and brown cultures, like storytelling is a huge thing. I imagine like people gathered around a fire and all talking and dancing and having music and stuff. So it's like a historical way that we have grown as a human race as well.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's life because even the cavemen had their storytelling on the caves. The Romans, like, not even just Black and brown cultures, but everybody in some kind of way is telling their stories, whether they are legit or not, or based on myths and all the things. Gilgamesh, Odysseus, the Greeks, and, you know, everybody had their things that were written down. I think over time, you know, some of the cultures' stories may have been lost or are not as prevalent in our culture today, but we definitely have this built in us, and it's always been a way that we connect with each other for sure.
And they're used to inspire, they're used to educate, they can comfort others and kind of show a light at the end of the tunnel for people who have already been there. I think there's a quote that's like, if you think that you're going through something nobody else ever has, read a book.
And I can't tell you how many times, like, in life, in my work, and hearing other people's stories, especially, like, for example, we worked with D.D. Hirsch Mental Health Services, right? And in certain spaces, I'm sure with you as well, in certain spaces that you work, you know, you often will hear stories from people. And what's so interesting is that people hold their stories in for so long, thinking that they are the only ones, or thinking that their story might be burdensome to somebody, or maybe down somebody else, or, you know, have some negative effect on the world. And it's so interesting how so often, as soon as the stories are told, what you get in response is, yeah, like, I have a similar story, and or somebody understanding and other people who can identify with the things that you're going through. And sometimes it sucks that we can keep our stories to ourselves for so long, because when we express them, when we can, right? Because there's a certain time to also express particular types of stories once you've kind of figured out what that means or maybe have healed from certain things. But when you tell them, they also help heal others. And it kind of is an example of how our lives and our experiences also are happening the way they are in order for us to have bigger impact on other people in particular ways, when we turn that pain or turn those stories into something that can be transformational for ourselves and for others.
And it's so interesting because you don't even have to try to make it something transformational. A lot of times that's just what people connect with. Instead of like trying to teach them where they read a paragraph and learn a thing, you can learn through a story. You can really connect, and stories tend to humanize people and help you build better connections.
Yeah, and even your small stories, like ordinary type things, those all can also have a big impact on other people. Recently, I heard some really powerful stories. I was in Dallas for the Black Moms Fair, and one of the ladies who opened up the conference, she called one of her girlfriends up. So obviously it's called the Black Moms Fair. So most of the people in the room were Black women, Black people. And there was this white woman. Her name was Vicky. I can't think of her last name right now. I want to say Atkins, but that might not be right. She called this lady Vicky Atkins up to the stage and told her story. And it was so crazy because I was like, we was all fighting tears. But she was like, yeah, and I want to introduce my girl Vicky to the stage. And she told this story where she was like, Vicky's son was murdered by 2 Black men. And what Vicky did after that was she started a whole scholarship fund of millions of dollars because from that story, like even telling it right now, I would get emotional. Because from that happening, she said, you know what, if they had different opportunities or more opportunities, they probably wouldn't have killed my son. And I was like, how crazy is that to think that deeply about and so clearly about what's really going on, and amidst obviously all the pain and everything from going through something like that. But she was telling that story about her and saying like since then, like she definitely dedicates so much money and she was basically kind of explaining like why y'all know y'all wonder why this white lady in here, but like she devotes so much of her time and money into building up some areas of Dallas and into projects and things like that to give more of the young Black men and people different types of opportunities and exposure. And I was like, that's such a crazy, powerful story. I thought about it a couple weeks after the conference randomly and was just like, dang, I can't believe it. Because I'm thinking like, what would I do in a situation like that? Probably not go there or not that quickly. But it was such a powerful story and it stuck with me to think that deeply. Also when, working with Tatiana and her story of when she gave birth and why she's into Black maternal health and all that, right? There's so many women who have issues. And what happens is that when you tell your story, all of a sudden everybody else is like, yeah, I have a story too. I have a story too. I have a story too. And you start seeing even your friends have stories all in these similar spaces. And it's like, man, if everybody kind of spoke up or if everybody was able to keep telling these stories and then also transform it to talk about the solutions that actually already exist, we could have so much more of a network. And also just the fact of like, yikes, it sucks that everybody has some of these stories. So storytelling is very, very powerful. Those are just a couple of examples very recently that I experienced from other people.
Yeah, when I think of that, I also I like what you said, that there's no small or ordinary story that doesn't matter, because sometimes we go through things in life where we're processing things and we think like it doesn't matter, it's not that big, or you don't even think about it as a story. And I'm saying that, and I keep doing air quotes if you're not watching the video, because I grew up around domestic violence and I never thought it was a thing. Like it was just something I grew through and whatever. And then turns out there's a whole organization because over some billion amount of people are affected every year all over the world, Black, brown, rich, poor. There's literally no moniker about like how people are touched by this, but so many people go through it. And in me sharing my story was then shared in a book, but I was able to really own that piece of my life and heal, because I didn't even know that was a thing that I needed healing from, but that was a big thing and I didn't think it was anything.
Yeah. Stuff can be so regular or normalized to us that we don't realize how that has really shaped us or affected us. So imagine if you didn't tell that story, or, there's so many stories that we have, right? And this doesn't have to be about sharing like a negative story or a story that impacted you negatively, rather. But what happens when we don't share our stories?
I think we miss an opportunity to heal and own, because there is something, and I'm not saying you have to share it in a book or share it in a conference like Vicky or Tatiana or anybody, but just even sharing and opening up with a therapist or sharing up, you miss an opportunity to heal and to own your own story and to process through it. Because if you're trying not to relive it, if you're trying not to whatever, or if you don't think it's something important, then there's this whole little piece of you that you're missing.
Mm-hmm. And you also just miss out on opportunities to connect with other people. Even in my work, when I'm asking folks questions about things and they have stories, and I can tell them like, oh, shoot, I understand that because I had an interesting story similar to that as well. And to exchange stories and to tell stories lets other people know like how you can connect on different levels. And then it's also really important because when we don't tell our stories, our narratives can be shaped for us by other people. Mm-hmm. So think about old white men and them trying to shape our narratives around women or Black people, people of color, etc. And it's so important, and you see this within entertainment as well, right? Of course, in regular life, but also in entertainment, where how it can be so much more impactful when the stories are told by the communities who are experiencing them and when they're more authentic. And it also is part of what creates empathy with others. So those stories from us and for us and around us and our communities can help inform and educate other people around as well.
Yeah, and that's so important when you think about really connecting with people. Like, and Vicky's story is so powerful because it really like I got goosebumps and teared up a little bit when you were telling it to me, and that's like secondhand, but it's making that emotion and experience like available to more of us, and it feels more tangible. Like you're able to understand people a little bit better whenever you hear a story, because you hear she did a thing, but you don't know why, and you hear the reason, you're like, wait, what? And then you hear a connection, it's like, oh my God, wow.
And those stories can help you break down stereotypes and assumptions too, because, and this is a backwards way, because she was a white lady. I ain't gonna hold you, because she was at a dinner the day before, and she was all extra and talking to people, and I was like, who is this white lady? Like, all right, she was talking about doing some real estate plans or something with folks, and I was just like, oh, okay, I see what's going on here. And then the next day, I hear a story about her son was murdered, and now she building up whole communities, and I was like, you know what, I was incorrect, and I had the wrong assumption. And of course, we can think about this in the other ways too, where we think about other people getting assumptions and stereotypes of us, but we can be guilty of those same things as well. And so being open and hearing and telling stories is a great connector in that way.
Okay, so that's personally. I'm talking to an expert. When we're thinking about storytelling for marketing and influence, why is this so important for brands and creators to be able to tell stories?
So everybody talks about storytelling as a big part of their marketing because of the fact that that's a good way to connect with people. That's a way to get people invested in you and want to follow you and see what you're talking about and doing, because they want to see themselves in you, or in some way they relate to you. And so we see so many people and brands take this route. And we remember stories 22 times more than you just remember facts. So instead of, just being like, alligators do this, or 25 gallons of water fall every whatever, like telling a story about a kid who has to wake up at 5 a.m. to go get water for his home and things of that nature is always going to be much more powerful and something that people remember. So that's one of the just main reasons right there.
Mm-hmm. Another one, when you think about brands and their stories about how they got started and they quit their job to do this and do this, it makes you like want to bet on them or be excited about them. Like Gary Vee talks about that all the time, like his story, and he was managing a liquor store and all these things, and you're like, you want to buy in. And when you think about like what brings you back to companies, especially like millennials, when you see spending habits, you're buying the person, you're buying like what the story that they're selling you, essentially, not just the product.
Yeah, and people are investing in that for sure. And you're also creating customer loyalty often when you are focusing your storytelling on the customer's journey also. So there's the stories of maybe you and the things that you're doing and find. And then there's also the stories that you could tell so that they resonate with the people who are watching and they see themselves in it, right? So now they can easily insert and associate themselves with your brand, or if you have a product, et cetera, et cetera. So like a couple of examples of kind of some slightly more personal type brands that do this. And I was just talking about them yesterday, actually. Humans in New York. I haven't heard from them or seen from them in a long time. And I wonder if they still pop off like that or exist on social. Yeah, but their whole thing was just like these questions to people, in their, not in their habitat, but like they were just outside and they would take a picture of them and ask a question. It was always these such interesting responses, deep responses that you know, it makes you think, like, even as you walk past people on the street, it's like everybody probably has so many stories. Like, I'll think about how many stories I have myself. I remember one time, where did I come back from? I came back from some trip, and I had been doing the most. I came back from this trip, and then I was just in Chipotle, and I was turning around, looking around like, damn, people don't even know I was, like, doing something so random, like, a few hours ago. And it's like, I wonder what's going on with other people. Like, everybody has so much going on, and it's like, we could be so much more open to connection and in that type of a world where, like, we're sharing stories with each other.
That is a very funny example, and makes me think about the lady I teach retreats with, Anna, and we were in Tulum. We were like driving through the jungle, and like there's like these big tarantulas walking across the street and all these things. Anyways, we gave up getting to the airport early so we could have another excursion. We were pushing it, but we made it in time, but we were dirty. And so we were like cleaning up real quick in the bathroom with like these little wipes. And this lady like walked in, and I know she thought we were prostitutes because she like covered her daughter's eyes and like moved it to the side. And we just died laughing.
Yeah,
like,
you don't know.
You have no idea.
And she ain't want to know neither. But also I think about storytellers, again, in entertainment. You know, I hear a lot of actors and people in entertainment that have a focus on storytelling in a particular way and for a particular reason. Issa Rae, Quentin Brunson, they're examples of folks where you think about their initial efforts with like their web series and or working at BuzzFeed and, you know, telling their stories or crafting entertainment in a way that they could, and how that's grown over time into almost its own type of a space and genre where it's like this real slice of life that's a little bit different than what we were used to seeing on TV and as something that got really big.
And when I think about that, two other examples popped in my head of people. So Nick Brooks, he was on an episode of Carlie's Couch. You can Google him, but he tells his story in the lens of fiction novels. So he worked for Teach for America, and he saw this need for novels and reading for Black men. And he's from DC, like the DMV area, and so he tells his stories there, and that is his way to connect with people. Think about Beyonce and how she storytells in her music and her visuals and her photos and things. And so it might not be direct talking, it might not be a web series, but you can also think about like what lenses you feel comfortable sharing your stories.
Absolutely. And shout out Nick. I love how him and Damo are like cool now. They be getting together and their kids play and stuff, so I think that's cool. So now we'll talk about like how we can become better storytellers. We have a few tips for you, so pay attention to these. The first one, a skill to practice, is clarity, knowing the point you're making. So we also talk about stories and tell stories when you're like presenting or doing things for work, like in meetings. There's ways that you always see the best presentations always kind of have those storytelling elements there. So in those cases, it can be easier to think more strategically about it in that way. But be sure that you have a clear point to your story and like, what's the moral of the story? What are you trying to get across?
Do you recommend that for people with their brands or their companies in short form content too?
That's why like all of these things are in the content that you consume, and you'll start to notice that's one of the practice ideas too, is paying attention to stories that stick with you. Pay attention to the things that actually catch your attention in the videos you actually keep watching, because a lot of the times the hook there is the clarity. So now, you know, all these B-roll videos where over it'll just be like, I realize that I should always do these things. And then it's like you look at the caption and now you want to see what's the things, or this is how I learned to run faster or something. And then you're seeing whatever. So like they always kind of let you know, like, this is what I'm about to tell you, or this is the point. And that's usually kind of front and center.
So starting with clarity, the next is emotion. Let people feel what you felt. Let them feel your emotion. Let that be a way for y'all to connect.
Yeah, one of the top emotions to evoke when you are trying to create shareable content is awe. And you know, when things are big, or like nature. And then second is them teasing things that they thought they knew, but they didn't know. So kind of challenging them as well. So those are some of the motions of like, oh, you thought a thing, but this is really, you know, how it is. Another that goes into that emotion and clarity also is the details. So this is just being obviously, I guess, a good storyteller is when you're given the details that lets them feel and smell and see what you saw. I am not that kind of storyteller. I'm the type of storyteller, I might can tell a story one time. After that, it's getting shorter and shorter and shorter and non-existent to the point of like, yeah, don't ask me nothing about that. But I have some friends where it's like, they'll tell me a story and then somebody else comes over and I can hear them tell the story again and I can see them tell it again and again. I'm like, dang, they really could tell this story for real. So it's good, though, when you can put all those details into it.
And then, so we have clarity, emotion, details, and then structure. So thinking about the beginning, the middle, and the end, and using this even in casual conversation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, make a clear point. So to practice these things, we already mentioned paying attention to what does stick with you. But 2, try to tell some small everyday stories in conversations.
That's important. And then when you're doing this, like by yourself, you can practice. So if you want to do content, you're working on telling stories, record yourself telling a story and then watch it and start to refine. Look at your facial expressions. Watch how you tell it. Did you include are you clear? Did you include emotion? Mm-hmm. Did you give enough details? How was your structure? You can look at all of those things in real time.
Yeah, and that's especially important when you're thinking about things like presentations or speaking to others with intent. Also think about like TED Talks too. When you watch TED Talks, they probably do a pretty good example of how they always incorporate the storytelling into it as well. Mm-hmm. So this week, we talked about storytelling, how it connects us, inspires us, it can build empathy. So we want you to share a story on social, in a meeting, with a friend, whatever. Use some of these skills and some of these tips. Be intentional about it, and see if it changes that connection between a person or the audience that you're talking to. So think about that a little bit more intently this week. Also, feel free to hit us at Carlie's Couch. Tell us your story. Tag us in a story that you're telling. Hop on your IG stories with your notifications off and be like, hey, guys, I'm going to tell y'all a story. That's what good social media is. And even without, like Carlie said earlier, saying like, this is a story, like even in the way you put up your photos and your things in a story, and I'm literally talking about like your IG stories, can be done in a way that like takes people on a journey. So try to be intentional about that this week, and we will see you in the future.
Peace.